I'd like to cover a slate of ideas here. I don't have notes, I don't have pictures for this one. It's just going to be all audio, and I probably won't refer to too many scriptures unless it's off the top of my head. And the reason for that is I'm trying to compress down an awful lot of material into this, and I just kind of want to do this free form. This presentation has been spurned by, not spurned, well, let's say catalyzed by comments from several people, situations that I know of, that several of you are in, and I have the premonition that this is applicable to many more, and so I just want to share some thoughts that I hope will be helpful for all of you who are in this situation, and maybe you hear this and then you find yourself in this situation. We live in a time when the economy is changing rapidly, and those changes are going to continue. And there's a long-term trend, although there will be aberrations along that trend. And so the writing's on the wall. What we have in a nutshell is that we've got people, probably we could categorize this into three parts. We've got people who are either in the workforce or will be soon, and they're struggling to find something they can do that will provide sufficient income for what they want out of life. There are those of you who are in the workforce and things are okay. But as you look at what is coming, you wonder if you're okay enough. And there's some kind of gravity that keeps you where you are. In other words, you have an idea that changes need to happen, but everywhere you look that provides an option for such a change seems like a jump that's just too large to make. And maybe it doesn't even seem like there's anything on the other side. You know, you could quit your job, but what do you do then? You can't really see alternatives. And then there's a group of people who are doing quite well, and everything for category 2, the rest of it is the same. It's just they're making more money. But you'd ask yourself, well, what needs to change there? There's a whole host of things that might suggest that changes need to be made. Maybe you're not living in a rural area and you'd like to. Maybe what you're doing is devoid of meaning and it just really doesn't feel right, and you're not sure what to do about that. Maybe you work at a large corporation, and whatever the case was with COVID, the writing's on the wall, and you know, with the woke tidal wave and everything else, that it's very likely that in the near future you're going to be asked to do something that crosses your moral boundary, and you'll be faced with the choice to either do what you really don't believe is right or be unemployed. And so I just want to maybe start with that category of people, the folks who are making decent money. Now, this actually applies to all three groups, but I just want to break down the situation right now in blunt terms. What is coming in the United States is the imposition of terrestrial law. And what that means, in the briefest terms that I can manage right now, is that God is going to create a situation where people get exactly what they deserve on a temporal basis. And rather than describe how that's going to happen right this second, I'm just going to say, suppose that that's going to be the case. Let's make it a supposition for now. Now, assuming that this is the case, what does that mean, that you get what you deserve? What does that mean? So the law of the terrestrial kingdom is justice, is God's justice, not the world's. To be clear, when I say that word, I'm talking about God's justice, which is merit. You get what you deserve, and it's according to his laws of cause and effect. Our sentimentalities, our culture, our nature, none of that matters. It's his law of cause and effect. You reap what you sow. You don't get to decide what plants are going to grow when you put corn seeds into the ground. You're going to get corn. You don't get to decide whether those seeds sprout or not. God has designed them a certain way to do a certain thing. You get to find out how they work, usually through trial and error. If you're wise, you'll find somebody who's already spent a lot of time and effort figuring it out, and you'll start there. You won't be chained to that, but you can stand on their shoulders for starters, and maybe that's the best place you could be, and you just stick with it. Or maybe you tweak some things and find something that works even better. But that's where you start, on their shoulders. And you run with it. And so that's the law of the harvest. You reap what you sow. You don't get to set the rules, but you do get to play the game. And so if you're wise, you're going to figure out what the rules are, and you'll play better than you otherwise would. Now, games are competitive, and usually in games, there's one winner and everyone else loses. With God's game, anyone can win, and the more people that do, the better. So that's nice. It's not exactly competitive. If anything, it's anti-competitive, because part of playing the game is helping other people. That's sort of how you win, actually. If you want to be the greatest, you have to be the least. So the best people will serve others the most. That's Jesus said, I come to you as a servant. And if I'm a servant and you're my servant, what does that make you? What should you be doing? If I'm sitting here crouching down, washing your feet, naked, just with a little towel on me, what should you ought to do? All right, so the law of the harvest, you figure out the rules and then you play the game. Now, in the terrestrial law, things are quite a bit different. And I want to highlight one specific situation with that. I know that when I say things like what I'm about to say, I know that most people just aren't going to understand what I'm saying, or it will seem so outlandish that they just think it's the most extreme thing in the world. But the funny thing about playing this game is that when you see or live a few steps ahead of the curve, it's an amazing thing, because the things that you do, people will see it as if you're trying to fight your way into being right about the future. But when you already know what's going to happen, and it's as real to you as whatever's right in front of your face, even more concrete than that even, that's not the game you're playing. You're just saying, look, this is the way it is, and we can all get with the program on this and align with it while there's the most to be gained from doing so. Or you can come to the party late like everybody else is going to, but there's really no choice. This is where things are going, and you get to orient yourself toward it as early as you want. And if you wait, it will be worse. That's just the way it is. And so this is one of those situations. So here's the crazy thing that I referred to. Almost everything that almost everyone does in the modern economy provides no value according to the terrestrial law. Almost everything will be lost in the process of that law being imposed. Now again, we could walk through basically every end time scripture to lend credence to this idea, but that's not the purpose of this. And I'm not saying, trust me, it's there, believe me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I will dedicate other time to proving this. Right now, I'm just trying to get to the point and give you as much of that to work on as I can, as early as I can. And certainly there are better ways of doing this. I just don't know what they are. But we'll do our best. So, What do I mean that almost everything we do is pretty much worthless in the terrestrial system? Everything we do for work, to be clear. Well, we've really been sold a false bill of goods, and this could get more detailed than it needs to be, so keeping it shallow, our entire economy right now, it's based on cheap energy and fake money. And when those things go away, as they are right now in real time, what happens is this sweet story that we've been sold of unprecedented prosperity and wealth, which if you look around you, the United States is basically the only country where you can be homeless and fat in the history of the world. That's how prosperous we are. Even the homeless people are fat. So historically, you had to sweat all day to get your bread, and that wasn't even enough. You're still a little scrawny, skinny guy. So we're swimming in unmerited prosperity. It comes from cheap energy, and it comes from fake money. And in the nations around the world that don't have those two things, we call those third world nations. And that's really, we like to pat ourselves on the back and think that we're exceptional in the United States because we have great principles or, I don't know, special people or something. I don't know what folks think is sufficient to get you there. Well, if we had any kind of special principles, those have been gone for a long time now. And the people here are no different than they are anywhere else, except for the fact that we're swimming in unmerited prosperity. A great deal of the differences between people here and anywhere else can be explained by whether they ate enough as a kid or not. So many of the differences are indeed cultural, but those are wearing away very rapidly because in all things, the United States is reverting to the mean. And so our culture isn't tremendously different from anywhere else in the world at this point, and in many ways it's a lot worse. It's like, it makes me think of the Book of Mormon when prophets are chastising the Nephites, saying, look, you think you're high and mighty compared to the Lamanites, but there are reasons that they have the problems that they do, and it doesn't come so much from their personal choices, but from the choices of their ancestors. And here you are reveling in also the choices of your ancestors, but they were positive choices. And you deserve it just as little as they deserve their negative condition. And that's the case we're in today in the United States and in the rest of the wealthy world. In the third world, what they could change through choice is very limited, given the fact that so many of them were malnourished as children and have low IQs because of that. And that situation won't change until they get fed enough as kids. And that won't change until other things change, which, it creates this chain of very tricky problems that can't be solved without presence, which can't be solved with current immigration law. But I digress. So back to jobs and justice. Let me give you some real-world examples of what I'm talking about. So there's been a tremendous bait and switch where historically people would have their own little farm, and maybe they'd have 10 acres, 20 acres or more, but 10 acres seems to be the historic requirement to support a family on relatively fertile land. So almost everyone in the United States was a farmer until very recently, about 100 years ago. That's not a lot of time. So before World War II, almost everyone was a farmer in the United States, and it had been that way since the beginning. And people were basically poor by today's standards. Now, by tomorrow's standards, they were quite rich because they could grow all the food that they needed to eat, and they were basically completely independent from anyone else. What they got from anyone else was just luxury. It wasn't the necessities of life. But today, basically everything you need to survive comes from other people, not on your property, not even in your town, and probably not even in your state. And in more cases than you probably realize, not even from your country. If you cut China out of the equation, almost all of your pharmaceuticals go away, including antibiotics. Basically everything you buy at the store that's not food goes away. And as far as food goes, that's probably coming from another state anyway. And even if it's not coming from another state, it relies on modern transportation, not just the vehicles and the fuel, but the roads. And not just that, but modern safety, because you can drive across the country without getting robbed, for the most part still. And so you take some of those things away, even one of those things, and you have a radically different life. And there's nothing you can do about it. So, historically, that was what we would consider today to be in poverty. However, what we are going to see is that perception is going to change rather rapidly, because you might not know this, but if you went to plant your fields 100 years ago, do you have any idea what return you would get on the seeds that you plant? Well, you'd get somewhere between 20 and 50 times the amount of seed that you plant back. We're talking about cereal crops. 20 to 50x. Now, it's going to be highly dependent on the nutrients in the soil and the weather and what you've got to break up the ground. But that's basically the story. And what's amazing about this is it's a lot of work to put seeds in, break up the soil and put seeds in the ground. But once they're there with the cereal crops, it's set it and forget it. You plant it, you walk away, and then you come back in the harvest and work really hard for like a month. That's basically it. Now, I'm oversimplifying things. You're going to have deer and things coming into your fields, and you have to take care of that. But that's kind of a problem that resolves itself, because now you've got meat to eat. You need to make sure that no yahoos come on your land and jack everything up. And that was taken care of in the United States because it was basically peaceful for a very long time because of the culture. Now, understand what this nation had for a very long time. The ability that if you just got yourself a little piece of land, which for a really long time, all that took was walking to a place where it was available for free. You just pop yourself down on a free piece of land that's now yours or very inexpensive. You start farming, and it's a ton of work to clear the land, but hopefully you're a 20-year-old man and you've got nothing but energy and time. And you clear the land, and maybe just at first you start cutting down trees, you build a cabin out of that, you cut up some firewood for your little cabin, and it would be little. And then you plant around the stumps, and it's only over time you pull out the stumps. It's what you're doing when you're waiting for your crops to grow, because it's a heck of a lot of work to pull out a stump without any equipment, modern equipment. And that's life. And then as you get old, your farm becomes this well-oiled machine where you put in X and you get 50X out every single year. Imagine that. And you've got a whole crop of kids to help you with the work and to take things over as you get too old to do it yourself. Now, we exchanged all of that as a society for what you see around you, for your six-figure jobs and your dual-income family, for your public school and your roads. And I get to drive for an hour to take my little girl to gymnastics. Now, even without addressing the voluminous negatives of the current system, just comparing the positives as if there were no cost, is this at all worth it? It's absolutely not worth it. There's no question. It's not worth it. for the vast majority of people, we're living in a much worse situation. There's no question. It's worlds apart. We've been sold a false bill of goods. And now, what I want to present to you is a case that it's actually even worse than that. Because we're all in a prison, and you don't even realize it. And this, all of these things I'm touching on, I'm just barely touching on them. They're much deeper topics. Any one of these things we could talk for a very long time about and fully explore. So what's this prison? I'll tell you what this prison is. What can you do that isn't what you already do? Let me explain that. So I started with these three groups. At the bottom, you have the people who are trying to get into some career, and there are no options for them. They look at the menu of options and say, there's nothing on this list that I can do that will ever be likely to make enough money that I can actually afford the life I want. There's no option. What are you going to do today if you're 15, 18, or even 30 and you're looking to get into your career? What are you going to do? For young people today, the only plausible, and I'm broad brushing here, right? But the only generic thing, it used to be back in the day, you could ask someone, hey, what are 3 jobs that someone could do and make a really good amount of money? And now you pick which one you want and you say, okay, what do I have to do to get this job? And then you do it. And not everyone could be a surgeon because there are entrance applications and selection processes and quotas. And once they hit the quota, it didn't matter how good you weren't going to get it. Like the way that this was explained to me with grants, which is true, is that there's a threshold of good enough, and then it's a roll of the dice after that. So your job is to do everything you can to get over the bar, and then hope that the dice lands on you. And that's how it is with being a doctor to this day. Or a lawyer. If you want to be successful as a lawyer today, you have to get into a top tier school, a very top tier school, not even like top 50, but maybe top 10, or else it's not worth it. And so that's getting above a threshold and rolling the dice, etc. Okay, so when I was thinking about careers, maybe as a junior in high school in 1999 or 2000, I guess is when that was, there were things on the list. And so I looked at the list and I said, okay, I'll be a programmer. And what do I have to do that? At the time, you had to get a 4-year degree. And so that's what I did. But today, what would someone do? Now, the good news here is that there are an awful lot of careers that you can get into that don't take the kind of sacrifice you had to do 20 years ago to get into them. You don't need a 4-year degree to be a programmer. All you need to do is spend a little bit of time while you're in high school teaching yourself how to code, and there are some phenomenal resources online for that. There are too many to even mention. And you just pop yourself through one of those, and all of a sudden you're making some good money. And you're on track to make a lot of good money. You could jump into a paid apprenticeship the second you graduate high school and become a master plumber and make good money that way. You could do all sorts of things, particularly with the trades. But with all of those things, you look at them and you say, well, with tech, maybe there will be a downturn and people will get laid off and then I won't have a job there. Or maybe I could work remote right now with the jobs that are out there, but what if something changes and I have to move to a big city? Or with the trades, the giant elephant in the room is illegal immigration. Because so many of those guys coming in, and they are mostly guys, have lots of experience in the trades. And even the ones that don't, they're not afraid to work with their hands. And they're hard workers, many of them. Culturally, there's an awful lot of people coming from south of the border who don't mind working all day for decent money. Unlike people in the United States, apparently. So, what do you think's going to happen? It's a gold rush right now because building costs are so stinking high right now. And in rural areas, which is where everyone's moving, there are no young people to field those jobs. The ones who are available are probably on meth or just the laziest people you'll ever meet. And so these illegal immigrants can come in and sweep up those jobs, and it's already happening right now. But what do you think is going to happen as the political pressure to give these people work permits keeps increasing? And who knows what the story will be. It'll probably be an agglomeration of a bunch of different heart-tugging fake reasons like, oh, these people, we have a worker shortage and this is a couple of birds with one stone. Or these folks need a pathway to be productive members of society and this is the way they can do it. Or, there's a million different things that could be told, stories that could be told in order to connive the people into saying, yeah, you don't actually need a green card to work. We'll just let people work. So, it doesn't even take anything new. That's the story that's been told for a long time, even before this illegal immigration bump during the present administration. For a very long time, the story has been we can't strictly enforce immigration laws because then no one will pick the crops. This is the only way we can pick the crops, is if we let people come here illegally. And anyway, so what happens to the trades when there are suddenly, 10 million people available to take maybe 500,000 jobs? Well, the hourly rates will plummet. And all those people who thought they had a sweet deal getting into the trades are now out of the job, unless they were smart enough to get into one that required some kind of multi-year licensing, like plumbing. And that's the buffer there, is that you could have a whole swarm of illegals get into plumbing, but you've got however long it takes to work up the licenses as a buffer, unless of course they got rid of that law. So, which could obviously, it could happen, but there's a tremendous lobby behind it. It's not likely to happen, just like some share of those people are medical doctors. I imagine it's very few. But there are many medical doctors from around the world who would love to move to the United States. And it's just not going to happen because there's this huge lobby of established doctors who like the fact that they have a monopoly. And so the licensing requirements for the medical industry are not going to change overnight. But that one is also off the menu because of all the shenanigans with the insurance industry and Medicare and Medicaid, and just inflation in general. There comes a point where people just can't pay anymore, and I think we're there. I think medically speaking, we're there. I see reports all the time of people, just normal people, commenting on news articles saying, yeah, we canceled our health insurance because we just can't afford it anymore. It's too much. And a lot of people are in that boat. It's kind of shocking that everyone's not in that boat. If you just save the money you would have paid for health insurance, you're probably paying less than that for medical expenses over years and years. And so it's become a lot like Social Security, surprise, once it becomes governmentalized, socialized. I was just talking yesterday with a friend of mine, and I recounted that when I was younger, I asked my grandmother what she made during her career, She worked her whole life. And then I totaled up that money on a spreadsheet with 6% interest, and she would have been a millionaire, even though she made nothing. And I knew how much she was getting in Social Security, and it's a travesty. It's a real scam how that works. And now it's like that with medicine, where people pay in tons and tons, and then when it's their turn, magically there's nothing there, right? So it's quite a fraud. Anyway, reeling this in back to the punchline, the main theme here. The long and short of it is, odds are, if you're already in the system, you're making way more money than you could doing anything else. And I mean way more. I was fixing some fans in my house yesterday, some bathroom fans. I'm pretty much a full-time maintenance man in my house. I don't know if it's like that for you other dads out there. But I'm constantly looking for ways to fix things instead of replace them, because it costs a lot of money to replace things. And so I've become quite handy at this. And I've done tons of renovation work, especially at our last house. I worked in construction for pretty much every summer from when I was 8 to about 23. And my wife was coming in because I was showing her something. It was sort of on her part of the house. And I said, in rural areas, there's a real need for handymen. And I've seen some reports of people charging $100, $125 an hour for this. And I did some quick math, and I said, man, if I had this many jobs per day, this many jobs per week, I could completely replace my current tech income, and I make decent money on that. And it would be a lot more fruitful for this whole ministry thing. I could just write, and then when I got a call on the bat phone, just go and do the maintenance thing. Because we live in an area, I don't think there are too many maintenance men out here, and no one can afford to drive out here from town, and so it might be a really nice thing. And there's a fence, because housing prices have gone up so much that anyone who doesn't already have a house could never come out here to start up a handyman business with intermittent work, because they couldn't afford the house that they live in, whereas we got in at a really good time. And she gave me the look of, I'll just let this one fizzle out on its own. She's pretty good at that. She just lets me whip out my crazy fantasies, and then they sort of dissolve with exposure to air, which is good. But there might be something viable there, And maybe that's a way forward for these sorts of things. But as soon as you start playing games with these ideas, like right now as a side project, me and my technically oriented sons, we are evaluating, I guess you could say, the idea of a business. And it's an app, and to spare all the details, it's to facilitate homegrown food from home producers, just people that have a garden kind of thing, to facilitate the sale of that between people. And so we're kind of excited about this, and we've got some irons in that fire, and it might work out. So here's the question. On the one hand, we've got skyrocketing food prices, and you look at prices of things in the store, and your money's not going so far, and you think, man, if I could just sell milk for $5 a gallon, or sell eggs for $3 a dozen, I could do this as my job. And meanwhile, the price of those things are just going to keep increasing because of the insanity in the world. You look at woke policies and communism destroying low price supply. You've got the price of fuel that's only going to go up, and frankly, it could very easily triple in no time at all. In no time at all, it could triple. You've got all these things, right? They're going to keep driving up the price. And you think, well, locally, my family doesn't have rainbow meetings every week, or let's take a half of a week off, or have a special position for someone that's just going to be an activist. And so we actually produce, our time transfers into production quite easily. And these are things that provide tons of meaning and practical experience for the kids, and they could be involved, so it's not just me. And it's really good stuff. This comes back to the meaning. You're providing meaning when you're talking about really good food that's grown on virgin land. It's got 30 times the vitamins and minerals as a store apple kind of thing. And if you're dealing with animals, you can make sure they have a humane and happy life while it lasts, compared to some kind of industrial monstrosity, and on and on and on. Like, who doesn't love fresh baked bread? Come on. It doesn't even compare with the store stuff. So, if you're facilitating all that at a much lower price than could be had otherwise for people that will pay it, that sounds like a great thing, right? Well, how do you get to six figures on that? How do you get to six figures on that? That's an awful lot of bread, folks. And so this is the problem, is the second you start down the road of looking for and gravitating toward the beacon of meaning in life, wherever you find it, you look for meaning and you go to that. It's an energy source. And you learn to sense it and follow it. Well, that's all well and good, except for the fact that it's going to lead you out of all these things that you've come to lean on so heavily. Now, when we talk in churchy terms, and maybe churchy is not the best word this time because they're not bad words and they're not bad meanings. So let's just say religious, which usually religious is a bad word, but when we talk in strictly spiritual terms about finding meaning and following it, finding light and following it, you're absolutely going to hit these terms that you've heard and said a million times and never really thought about how closely they're interwoven into you. Like Babylon. Like the phrase to get gain. Like the adjective harlot. So basically, you start to see just how fully you are sewn into a system that is entrapping and causes you to perish. That's a deep word in the scriptures, perish. If you look up what it's translated from in Hebrew or Greek, you get much deeper meanings than the English limitations. When we say perish, it's like, oh, that's a fancy word for die. Sort of. It's more like decaying, which the final state of that is death. But it's like gravity that pulls you towards death. That's what perish is, to perish. And our system is the way of death. It's not the only way of death, but it is in that gravitational field, and it is that gravitational field. And it will pull you down and down and down, and the flaxen cords get thicker and thicker and thicker. So let's say that you are around the age I am, or maybe older, and you played your cards well. You did this intelligently and intentionally, or maybe by accident, and you ended up in the same place, but you found yourself a career where you make decent money, and you have enough money to support a family. You guys can spend time together. You have some discretionary time and money. And over the last few years, maybe for longer, you have found that this is totally devoid of meaning. Not the things you spend the money on. Those are all delightful. Well, they could be. I'm not saying when you waste the money on stupid things, but you have found a connection between the money and the good things. But then you look at how you generate the money and you say, I couldn't detest what I do more than I do. And it's the worst kind of situation because it's not that it's backbreaking work or that it's overly stressful. I've found a way to make all that work for me, to overcome all of that to an extent. But I go to work and I just feel like a vacuum is sucking out my soul for 8 to 10 hours. And then I come home and I've got nothing left for what really matters. And then on weekends, I just feel like a zombie, a spiritual zombie. And I feel chained and I don't know what I can do to make it better. Or you're like, I love my job, I hate my boss. Or I love my job, I hate the people I work with. Or I love the people I work with, I hate my job. Some mixture of these things, right? But what it comes down to is your beacons of meaning in life, your spouse, your kids, your even, you might have some hobby that you just absolutely love. Like maybe you do some gardening and you're like, when my hands are in the soil, I can feel God smiling. It's a kind of a riff off of what the guy said in Chariots of Fire. He said something like, when I run, I feel the Lord's pleasure. What an amazing thing. And you've probably done something in your life where you felt the Lord's pleasure. And it is a source of energy. It's like plugging your finger into an electric socket, if that were a good thing. It's just so different. And you feel like you're in the flow. But you can't do that at work. And so it's so funny because on the one hand, modern prosperity, which is unmerited for the most part, it leaves us with much more time and energy to think and feel than you would have if you were some serf working in a peat moss bog 400 years ago in Europe. Because if that were your situation, your life would really be miserable, but you just wouldn't have much time to think about it. You'd be so exhausted. And plus, you'd die not too long after you were mature enough to think about it in the first place. People died historically around 40. And if you live to be about 80, you understand why that was probably a good thing. It's so interesting to watch people fight for their lives late in life, while if you look around, I mean, that'll really tell you more than anything else where your anchors are as far as spirituality goes. I would be so happy to die at any moment, having some idea of what awaits me. And that is a deep enough statement that I can't make it without sounding frivolous, but I assure you, I mean it with my whole heart. The only thing that I want more than to return to the Lord is to stay here, so I can help others work towards what I know awaits me. And that's something that I've begged the Lord for, and He has honored my request. But I don't understand, as people age, I don't understand what they're clinging so hard to, because I haven't seen anyone have anything good in life after 80. I haven't seen that yet. I just see misery. But I digress. So, as you think about, or as you perceive the beacons of meaning in life and you move towards those, what you're going to find is you have to move away from so many things that you take for granted in life and you didn't realize were your chains, like your house. So how many people live in a place where they could afford that? Even if you've busted your butt and you've paid off your house at whatever age you are, doesn't matter, you've paid off your house and you've reduced that expense and it's phenomenal, and you could choose to say, look, I'm just not going to get insurance on my house anymore. You don't have to once you don't have a mortgage. It's not obligated. And so you've just taken out, if you're on a fixed rate mortgage, that's not a question of inflation, but inflation affects your house in two ways. Three ways. One, it costs a fortune to do repairs. Two, your property insurance goes through the roof. And three, your property tax goes through the roof. So even when you pay off your mortgage and you get rid of your homeowner's insurance, if you choose to do that, that can cut you off from inflation that way. And even if you take good care of your property and you've trained your children to not be wackos, or hopefully their children, if you're old enough, that's harder because it's a more distant thing and there are other people involved who aren't your kids, whoever they marry. But hopefully, little kids aren't destroying your property left and right, so that cuts down on that cost. But what about that property tax? So right now, I just went to war with the county, my county, and I managed to get to convince a panel of my peers that the county was charging way too much on our property tax, and so we got it lowered significantly because they raised it 50% in a year, which is insane. It's absolutely insane. A significant portion of my property tax, I live in a county, but 75% of the votes in the county are in the city. And so what the county council does is they spend tons of money in the city. It's disproportional. And the county has to pay it. And it turns out that it's even worse because there's a little multiplier on the way they do our tax assessments. And people that live in the county, they charge us an extra 60%. And they say that it's for reasons other than what I'm describing. They say it's because people that live in a county would have to pay a premium on the house that they buy versus if it was in the city. The reverse is actually true. The data shows the opposite. That's actually the whole reason we moved to where we did when we did, was because we couldn't afford the house we needed in the city. So I said, well, I'll just commute and we'll live in a nicer place for the same price. So it's a total scam. And you're imprisoned and you don't even know it. So 75% of the people in our county control the other 25, and they milk us for taxes. We're tax mules for them. They know that we totally disagree with them on pretty much everything. And yet here we are. And what can be done about it? You know, your specific situation will be different. In our situation, nothing. Because the state only allows you to split a county if you can get 50% of that county to support the split. So what do you call that in a word? Bondage. It's slavery. We are slaves to the city. And we're not alone in this. Pretty much every state in the country is in this situation where the giant city that's closest to you is your master, and you are its slave. And so even if you've done everything right in life and you've been willing to sacrifice way more than normal people to get a house, get it paid off through working your tail off, and you've told yourself your whole life, well, if I just keep pushing, I know this is hard and no one else is doing it, but if I just keep pushing, I'll get to the point where I have way more time to do what is important to me, instead of just trading my time for money in something that really doesn't make the world a better place. And you get to that point, and now guess what? You're going to still be paying several months of mortgage a month, equivalent, because your mortgage is paid off, to your property tax. And if you're old enough, if you paid off your house long enough ago, you're going to be in a position where the amount you're paying in property tax actually exceeds what you would have been paying on your mortgage. And that is insane. And it's completely unjust. It's completely unjust. So you're a slave. Okay, so as a slave, you can't decide what you want to do, because even in the best of situations, you get to pick from a menu that your master gives you. And your master is Babylon. And on that menu, you will not find buy 10 or more acres and farm it. If that's what you want to do, you just want to be left alone, and there's no paper you can sign that says, I want to just have a piece of land, and I will never, ever call on the government or my neighbors for anything. If I need something, if my house is on fire, it will burn to the ground unless I can put it out. But in exchange for that, I want to be left alone. I don't want to pay no stinking taxes, right? You don't get that option, ever. So, as you're staring well, there's a little star asterisk on that. Maybe we'll get to that in this video. As you're staring this down, you're looking at your job where you're making good money, or you're looking at no job because you're not there yet, or you're looking at your decent job where you make enough to pay your bills, but you're really worried about the future because you can't really absorb another 30% increase in food without eating less. You're in trouble, right? Because you feel like there's nothing you can do. Well, it turns out that so often in life, there is still something you can do, but you're not going to like it very much because the price seems inordinately high. So with the remainder of the time, what I hope to accomplish here is to persuade you that you really have two options on the table. One is to take the road that you think you're on, some of you, but to have a much more accurate view of it and to realize that the cost is so much greater than you think it is. The other road is to have a lot more joy in the situation you're in, even though you aren't willing to change it. Even though it is as bad as you think it is, but maybe the perks you have not fully appreciated. All right, so let's delve into this. Is there a path where you could actually escape Babylon right now? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. What would it cost? Way more than you would like. Way more than you would like. Without spending the time necessary to lay out exactly what that is, I will just tell you the creature comforts that you would enjoy are far less than what you have now. And the cultural sentiments that you don't realize you cling so tightly to right now, that they would have to go. And that would cost you a lot more than you think because you're so attached to them and you don't realize it. Now, a lot of you are going to be like, why don't you just tell us what you're talking about? I'm not trying to hide anything. It's just a lot to explain. It's a lot to explain. And doing it partially is probably the same as doing it poorly. But just to give you some bullets, let's say that you're a highly trained professional in whatever, and you're making six figures right now. Do you really think that you're going to be emotionally okay with showing up to someone else's property and living in a tent, say, with your family, and picking beans all day long, let's just say, and shelling beans? Let's say that that's your job. And out of that, you get food to eat. And it's food that you don't deserve because all you're doing is picking beans, but you're part of the system, and so you get your food. And you might be an exceptional person in that you say, I would trade that right now. If I could get out of all this nonsense, I'd much rather be picking and shelling beans all day and eating really simple food and not an immense amount. You're not going to be overweight in this situation. It won't be possible. And I'd be way happier doing that. Okay, what about your wife and your kids? Are they going to be way happier doing that? So most people, let's just start with the kids. Most people's kids they really need some work. And if you took them out of their little bubble in any way, even just one way, like you decrease the video games or you take away their cell phone for an hour, they would go into anaphylactic shock, let alone if they had to actually work hard for a whole day, let alone if they had to eat something that wasn't their favorite thing to eat every day. And I'll leave it to your imagination on the wives to keep this short, because that you probably don't need my help on that one to imagine how bad that would be. Okay. Now, I haven't gotten into why that gets you out of property tax and everything else, but there's a path. So you say, well, yeah, sure, I wouldn't be too happy with that, or there's no way my wife would go for that, or my kids would stage a revolt, a mutiny. But why does it have to be that bad? Why can't I just live in both worlds and continue the standard of living while doing meaningful things? Because those roads don't meet. They don't meet. And if you think they do, go for it. Go all in 100%. And if you discover something that I'm not aware of, please do me the favor of letting me know. I'm 100% sincere with this. And let me know how that goes. I don't think that it can work. I don't think there's a way. So, now let's look at the other side. Let's look at the other side. So you go all in on a career, and you just have to swallow the pill, the bitter pill of a lack of meaning in what you do. Now, except for the money. Now with this, there is a caveat of there are things that you need to do to make sure you're not doing things that are immoral, and you need to do your best to not get into a field that's just going to drop dead one day, and you need to do your best to not be working for people that are dumber than you, because that's not going to go well, and on and on and on. And that's all hard enough. But as you do your best with that, it does reduce down to I'm trying to make as much money as I can while preserving as much time as I have for more important things. And you can get that optimized. And if you're not willing to do option A, we'll call it, because it's the first thing I described, that is the best thing you can do, is option B. If B isn't strictly for Babylon, but you're trying to do a mitigated Babylon situation, where you're like, look, I need to live in a house, and I need to have the illusion of independence, but what I'm going to try to do is get as much time as I can so that I can do meaningful things with my family. And there are many things you can do to mitigate Babylon. You can make sure your young children don't have cell phones. You can get them jobs as early as you can, have them do extra work around the house, have them do chores around the house and not get paid, have them spend as much time actually playing outside as possible, whatever. Moving to a place where all of these things are more feasible. Homeschooling, getting into homeschooling co-ops if it's too hard to manage just with one person, and all this other stuff. Spending time as a family as often as you can on a regular basis, spending time with your kids, teaching them skills. Don't just do entertainment, but actually do things that matter, where they learn, where they work hard, where they improve. So, with these two things laid out, and by the way, why is option B not the optimal? Because it's going to suddenly crumble. It's going to suddenly crumble, and you won't be able to predict when. So, you're going to get things like we've already seen with COVID. There will be many more things like this. You suddenly get laid off. You didn't see that coming. And lo and behold, you don't have options like you thought you were going to. And now, forcibly, you've found yourself in a situation that's not too far off from situation A, just without all the good stuff. All the bad stuff's still there. You have all the worry. You don't know when, there isn't worry in option A, but all the security you thought you had in option B goes out like the tide, and you find yourself with maybe a little bit of savings, but maybe not even that, and you have no idea what to do. And then all the doors start closing, and you thought you'd be able to sell your house. You can't do that. Nobody's buying, whatever. And then you find yourself in a really bad situation. And we shouldn't be motivated by fear. We should be motivated by love. But we do also have to be honest about consequences. And concern is not the same as fear. When you expect bad things for reasonable reasons, that's not fear. It's different. It's just anticipating consequences. Okay, so what's the worst of both of these worlds? Is to think you're doing both at the same time. And what do I mean by that? If you're in option Babylon, we'll call it, and you decide, I can actually make option A while I'm still in option B. I know what I'll do. I'll quit my fancy pants job and start my own business. Or I will quit my fancy pants job and get another job in Babylon that doesn't have any of the problems of my other job, my first job. That's a rarer case, but let's just think about that. So often, as men get older and they realize that they have no meaning in their job besides the money, and that they're paying an awful high price for that money, and it's not worth it, they start to do a little freak out. And I've seen this happen many times where guys they'll quit their job and they'll convince themselves that they've got a viable track for entrepreneurship. I know someone quite well who did this. He had worked himself to the top of his field, basically. He had maxed out his earnings potential with that. And he was working like a maniac. Now, he was making massive amounts of money, but he felt no meaning from it. Partially because his wife was spending it all on stupid things, but also just because it was an enormous expense. It took his heart and soul and all of his time, and he just wasn't getting much out of it. So he thought, I know, I'll just throw all this away, and I'm going to be a consultant because I'm really smart, and I can help business people make a lot more money than they do. And he went this route, and long story short, he forgot all the constraints of humanity. And what I mean by that, specifically in this case, is that many businesses do need consulting. They do need, the ancient kings, they had wise men. There's a reason for this. They had wise men that they would consult. And these wise men, it was their whole job in life, they got a salary to just be around to give advice. And it was a good salary. And the kings relied upon them. But modern businesses are not as smart as ancient kings. And they don't understand the value of independent wisdom. And so if you find a business that needs consulting, and there are many of them, your problem has nothing to do with the consulting. It's that the company needs consulting in the first place because they're unwise. But you need them to be wise to hire you. Do you see the problem? This is unavoidable in consulting. And so you come up with this brilliant idea that's going to make them tons of money, but you can't tell them what it is, because if you do, then they have it and they don't have to pay you. The value is the idea. They're going to handle the implementation, but you're there for the idea. And if you don't tell them what your idea is, they have no idea how valuable you are, and they're not going to pay you. And so it's a catch-22, and I don't know of a way to get out of that. Otherwise, I'd be a business consultant. And so, he didn't make nearly as much money as he made with his prior job. He lost his house, and it just kicked off a downward spiral that was terminal in this case. It never went away. The problems just kept growing. And so looking back, he would have been a million times off to just stay at his boring old job doing the thing that he was doing. It turns out that there would have been opportunities along the way to make that less onerous, thanks to the technology that came about with time. So, I hope what I'm saying is plain here. If you have acquired a skill set where you can make gobs of money, in all likelihood, this is broad brushing because I don't know every person's particular case, but in a general sense, you're going to be hard-pressed to find anything you can do that's nearly as wise as continuing to do what you do, unless you go for option A, which you're not going to. No one's ready for that. A whole lot more suffering needs to come before anyone's ready to sign up for that. And in the event that you're going to email me and say, I'm ready, look around your family first. I seriously doubt it. And I seriously doubt you're ready because your family's not ready. Someone who's willing to do that is also going to have a well-managed family that's integrated. They're not going to have logged years and years of just people pleasing while their wife and kids or husband and kids grow off like random branches on a fruit tree that's never been pruned. Things going to be well-oiled and oriented. You know, a well-functioning family has a purpose that's defined, and it's the father's purpose, and everyone else is developed sufficiently to be oriented toward that purpose and contribute toward it, much more than they take away. And if you're not in that situation, you're not ready for option A. And if you are in that situation, let me know, and I will stand corrected. So, option Babylon, you need to use the resources you have to the greatest outcome. And it's highly unlikely that that involves starting a business, although it could. But one hallmark, so many things in life, they won't support competition. And starting a business is usually like that, where if you're just doing it part-time, it's never going to work. But on the other hand, sometimes if you want to dip your feet in the water while working your nice full-time job that pays a lot, sometimes that's the safest way to play it, because you'll learn that it's never going to work before you risk your golden goose. And again, there are exceptions to this, but that tends to be the way it works. Once you have surpassed the average in terms of income, it becomes diminishingly, it becomes more and more unlikely that you're going to find something better while still in the Babylon system. So that's something to think about, and it's really important to think about that. All right, so what about the folks who are in the bottom category, where they don't really have a career yet and they're searching for that giant source of meaning? Well, the first thing I would encourage you to do is look around, because what you're trying to do is find you're ahead of the game in that you're looking for greater meaning than the people that bought into Babylon. The problem is you have not put in the work that they have when they figure it out. And so if I had to compare the two situations, I'd say you're in a worse situation than those in the other two categories, because at least they have resources to fund some portion of the meaning they seek in life. You neither have the resources nor the meaning. So they lack meaning. They lack the meaning they seek. But they still have a whole ton of it because they've put in the work to have the resources. You have neither. And so you need to take a little humble pill and submit to getting a job that pays well, even if it doesn't make you giddy to go to work every day. And you just need to prioritize your life to say, what do you want and how badly do you want it? Because if what you want is a wife and kids, you need some money. There's no two ways about it. There's no two ways about it. And it's truer now than it ever was in modern history, because you need a lot of money, not just a little, a lot. I think single people are delusional, men and women, in that in young single people today are delusional, downright delusional, in their lack of awareness of what things cost. And maybe if they're young enough, if their parents are young enough, maybe their parents are to blame here because they didn't share with them any of the financials of their family. They have no idea what things cost or how hard it is to get a decent job. A lot of middle-aged people are in the same place with work as I am with my house. They kind of lucked out. And now, well, I don't want to put it that way. There was quite a spiritual miracle to coming here, and I can think of all the work it took to get here. But they find themselves in a job where they're grossly overcompensated, and they just kind of lucked out in getting there. Their whole career was a chain of lucking out. Not so much working harder than everyone else, but just sort of ending up in a better position than most. And that happens. And if your parents were like that, you're going to get raised with this crazy idea that you can roll out of bed and have everything you want in life, because that's what happened to your parents. And I know people like this. It's very sad. Because they're absolutely not willing to pay the price of what they want, what it actually costs. With young women, this manifests in them taking their sweet time to find a successful man to marry. And you notice I'm putting the onus on them. You have to raise your hand as a quality young woman to draw the attention of successful men who otherwise will not be able to find you in the sea of women not worth marrying, which is the standard, standard today. You have to show that you're different, and you find them. And I made a video about that. Solomon is in the title, I believe. But we tell the story of the Queen of Sheba with Solomon. And young men, they expect to jump over paying their dues. And they want to jump straight to the payout of meaning. And again, if you want to go into path A, there is a path for you. But in that case, that specific case of men who don't have careers yet, if in your chain of meaning is a wife and kids, if that's part of your plan, that is not the path for you. Not yet. There will come a day when that is viable. But you can forget it with any woman alive today. No woman worth marrying today is going to be happy with a guy who lives in a tent picking beans for someone else. Do you get that? So you need to get out there and bust it out. And if all you're doing is just kind of like the suitor tests in the Odyssey, fine. Derive your meaning from that. Just say, this is the price I have to pay in order for a quality woman to know that I'm worth marrying. If that's what you need to do to get yourself into it, fine. And get on with it. Because every day that passes, you're lowering your worth in their eyes. And it's valid. You can't complain about that. That's all they have to go off of. And you're making yourself less qualified. So pick a path, get into it, get at it, be frugal, save everything you can, look for opportunities for investment that balance risk and reward, and go for it. And that I said young women are delusional about what family costs, and young men are too. Because in addition to what their parents may have shielded them from what it costs today, or maybe their parents are too old to have been hit by the present inflation, so you should go talk to somebody that has kids in diapers to find out what things cost and how attainable a house is today, making any kind of normal money. But also, young men are very happy with very little, and they don't understand that the second you bring a woman into the picture, your expenses explode. And they will never stop doing that. Every extra dollar you make, your family will find a way to spend it. And it's something that you have to mitigate. But you can't just look at life and say, well, I can get by on ramen and having a milk crate as furniture. And so, yeah, I could afford a wife and a kid. Or 3 kids? No, you can't. You can't. You have to make more money than average to have a hope of that. And that's before you get into the better things in life, like being able to live in a place that's rural enough that your kids can go outside and play without being recruited into some gang or stabbed by some gang. One of my sisters moved into a place that I moved around a lot as a kid, but she moved into the same street that one of the streets we lived on when we were moving around. And not too many years had passed, maybe 10, since we had lived there. And she said her kids don't go outside to play anymore. This was years ago. She said, my kids can't go outside to play anymore because every time they do, there's this gang of little 9-year-old kids and they have knives. And they threaten my son. And I tried to talk to the kid's mom and it didn't go well. We almost had to call the police. And so they're just going to stay inside now. And that's what it's like. Most kids in college right now, so they're not kids, but let's say 19-year-olds. Most 19-year-olds have hardly ever played outside. There's so many normal things that kids don't do anymore, and it really messes them up. Anyway, this is long enough, but I hope this gives you some things to think about. I've told you this already, but it doesn't hurt to say it as many times as I can. What you're going to find as the end times roll out is you're going to see that things that are valuable that you took for granted are actually much more expensive than you thought, and the cost to have them is going to skyrocket. And so there are many, 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 many people that have some expectation of quote-unquote Zion. And they really think that they're just going to jump straight from normal Babylonian life into something even better. That's their idea of Zion. I don't know, but it's going to be better than what I've got right now. And their values are still stuck on things like more food than you need, more money than you deserve, and Wi-Fi. And something better is awaiting them in Zion, and they're just going to get this golden staircase to walk up to it. You don't understand that God has to teach you what is actually valuable and how much it's actually worth, or else you can't have the joy that you would otherwise have there. And in order for him to show you that value, he has to show you the lack of value in the things you presently value. And he's going to do that. He's going to do that by taking away or crushing everything that you value right now. That's how he's going to do it. And anything that remains will have much more value than you presently assign it. And that's how it's going to work. And all of a sudden you're going to look at living in a tent and picking beans for someone else and say, wow, that's paradise. Now, I'm purposefully giving a diminished description of all that. But I promise you that even if you had the real description, you would see it not too much differently than living in a tent and picking beans for someone else. So that's probably good enough for now. Okay, I hope this helps. Please don't destroy your lucrative income by doing something stupid, thinking that you're moving towards Zion. You have to think in terms of meaning, and you have to follow that beacon of meaning while not doing really stupid things. Because in the end, are you going to have more meaning being broke and having burned through a historically unheard of amount of saved money, starting your own business, quote unquote, or are you going to have more money just holding down a normal 45-hour-a-week salaried job, making gobs of money, having tons of time off, and spending that time with your family, hopefully preparing them for what lies ahead, helping them be better people, getting to know the Lord better, helping others with your scads of money. So those are things to think about.